I got this to say, you're acting like a crowd of kids. The booing rose and died again as Piggy lifted the white magic shell. Which is better, to be a pack of painted savages like you are, or to be sensible like Ralph is? A great clamor arose among the savages. Piggy shouted again. Which is better, to have rules and agree, or to hunt and kill?
At last the words of the chant floated up to them across the bowl of blackened wood and ashes. Kill the pig, cut her throat, spill her blood.
I find it very difficult to talk here now because I'm watching the sea all the time. The sea always makes me watch it all the time. I've spent hours and hours, not just on the sea, but just watching wave after wave come in. If it's an image of anything, I think it's an image of our unconscious, the unconscious of our own minds. Or you could say, I suppose you could put it the other way around, and that is that we have a sea in us. After all, we are sea creatures that learnt to walk on the land, are we not? And perhaps one way or another we go back to it. Every night when we dream, we go back into that kind of depth, and with that kind of beauty and monstrosity and mystery. So really the sea is not a single image. It can really image almost anything that the human mind can discover.
He died in this house. He died, in fact, in what was then my brother's room, David's room. I'm afraid he had got rather drunk. And we think he'd got up in the middle of the night and sat on a sofa. We know he was sitting on the sofa, and the sofa faces one of these great big windows that we have here, and it faces east. And it was midsummer. It was the 19th of June. 1993. And I think he must have seen the sun coming up behind the trees there. And ironically, although this is Cornwall where he was an old man, the trees there are beech trees, as they were in Savernake Forest near Marlborough, where he lived as a child. And so in a curious way, in his death, I think, you could see him as coming round full circle.
And then, quite suddenly, he knew he was not alone. It was not that he saw or heard a presence. He felt it, like the warmth of a fire at his back, powerful and gentle at the same time. And so immediate was the pressure of that personality. It might have been in his very spine. He bent his head in terror, hardly breathing. He allowed the presence to do what it would. I am here, the presence seemed to say. Do nothing. We are here.
He was very strange, I think, in his relationship with reality. Very early on, he was taken out to Savernake Forest near Marlborough by his parents. And they were playing around, he was little, and they pretended to hide behind a tree at the end of the walk. And he suddenly found himself alone and looked up, and glaring at him over the brushwood was a huge stag, which he knew, he says, he knew wasn't a real stag, was something else, something other. Right to the end of his life, he believed in the other.
William Golding emerged as a writer in the 1950s with a series of astonishingly original novels. Their subjects include a group of schoolboys stranded on a tropical island, the final days of Neanderthal man, a sailor marooned on a rock in the middle of the Atlantic, a talented artist consumed by his own ruthless ambition, and the building of a spire on a medieval cathedral. But they are all expressions of a unique and powerful imagination.
Locke looked away over the river to forget his hunger. He flared his nostrils, and immediately was rewarded with a whole mixture of smells. For the mist from the fall magnified any smell incredibly, as rain will deepen and distinguish the colours of a field of flowers. There were the smells of the people too, individual, but each engaged to the smell of the muddy path where they had been.
Golding couldn't be alone at night, even with the light on. He says he was terrified, would have to rush upstairs and lie beside Anne and hear her breathing and know that it was all right. If he went into a room at night, he said he had to throw the door open very loudly so that anything that was inside would be warned and go away.
But before I could close the door, the incorrigible schoolmaster in him had called me back. I tell you something which may be of value. I believe it to be true and powerful, therefore dangerous. If you want something enough, you can always get it, provided you are willing to make the appropriate sacrifice. Something, anything. But what you get is never quite what you thought. And sooner or later, the sacrifice is always regretted.
Golding went on to win the Nobel Prize, but when his first novel was published in 1954, he was already 43 years old and working as a teacher at Bishop Wordsworth School in Salisbury.
Morning. Right, sit down, please. Now, how far have we got? Right, lend me a book, somebody.
He was a scruff, and he was known as Scruff.
Right, come up and show us what you can do.
In the Junior Six, I was a member of the Bishop's Players, and he produced a play, and I was one of those who was one of his actors.
By the time I had him, Lord of the Flies had just been published. I think earlier in his career in the school, he may have had some input and done something, but I think by the time he first published that, I think he then had lost all interest in teaching. My recollections are that he gave you an exercise book and told you to write, and he did his own thing. Or he told you to read a chapter, and he did his own thing.
Now, our first focus today is on the work you've done on the island. And I've looked at your maps. Quick reminder, somebody, when do the boys realise it's an island, even though they've sussed it out? Nick?
When they go to the top of the mountain, the three of them, and they have a look around, and it's like boat-shaped sort of thing.
Yeah, boat-shaped. The coral was scribbled in the sea as though a giant had bent down to reproduce the shape of the island in a flowing chalk line, but tired before he had finished.
I've always been puzzled, and am still at this moment. I'm in a state of confusion between the imaginative world and the real world. It is perfectly true to say that I have sometimes in my life found that the imaginative world had pushed the real world right out of the way, was literally more real.
The boy with fair hair lowered himself down the last few feet of rock and began to pick his way towards the lagoon. And though he had taken off his school sweater and trailed it now from one hand, his grey shirt stuck to him and his hair was plastered to his forehead. He was clambering heavily among the creepers and broken trunks when a bird, a vision of red and yellow, flashed upwards with a witch-like cry. The fair boy stopped and jerked his stockings with an automatic gesture that made the jungle seem for a moment like the home counties. We were living in a council flat at the time in a converted Victorian house, my wife and I, and we just put the children to bed, and pretty exhausting it had proved to be. And I'd been reading, well, we'd both been reading to them offhand, Cannibal Island, Treasure Island, Coral Island, Anybody's Island, Pirate Island, Islands Incorporated, really. And I said to her, wouldn't it be a good idea to write a book about what actually would happen to children if they found themselves alone on an island? And my wife said, that's a first-class idea, you write it.
The rock struck Piggy a glancing blow from chin to knee. The conch exploded into 1,000 white fragments and ceased to exist. Piggy, saying nothing, with no time for even a grunt, travelled through the air sideways from the rock, turning over as he went. The rock bounded twice and was lost in the forest. Piggy fell 40 feet and landed on his back across that square red rock in the sea. His head opened and stuff came out and turned red. Piggy's arms and legs twitched a bit, like a pig's after it has been killed. Then the sea breathed again in a long, slow sigh. The water boiled white and pink over the rock, and when it went, sucking back again, the body of Piggy was gone.
The same sort of houses?
The houses are the same. They're...
Golding grew up in Marlborough, an old market town in the middle of rural Wiltshire.
And you used to sleep in that room?
When I was a very small boy, I slept in there. I was sent to bed early in the evenings, the way nice children were in those days. But the nasty children, who were the ruffian sort and had their shirts sticking out of their trousers and that, they used to play around here on the green.
Did you ever feel like escaping and joining the ruffians, or did you know your place?
I knew my place. I'm not really adventurous socially. I knew I was one of us and they were one of them, and the terrible thing was that us didn't really extend any further than the house, so really we had no place.
It took a bit to persuade him to do it, and it was very difficult because I came to him at a time when he'd just been through a big depression, savage depression, which I knew only a little about. I wasn't aware of its size when I met him. I went down to the house near Salisbury, and he couldn't have been more charming, and Anne, his wife, was wonderful. We got colossally drunk, which seemed to be part of what he wanted to do. I didn't mind either. And then those were the days he drove me back to Salisbury, drunk as a skunk. He's always been a rather strange writer, nothing to do with the contemporary cliques and clerks of English fiction, almost a hermit scholar looking for meanings, telling his stories, but full of sharp wit and social observation when he's needed it. I think he saw himself as a scholar. I mean, as you know, he'd been a school teacher, he had a real interest in ancient civilizations, particularly Greek and Roman, and the novels are rifted with scholarship.
Golding and his older brother, Jos, were both pupils at the local grammar school, where their father, Alec, was one of the teachers.
His father was a scientist, brilliant actually, brilliant scientist, though he never got beyond being the science master at Marlborough Grammar School. And he was an atheist, and indeed brought Golding up rather strictly as an atheist. And on the other hand, there was the mother, who believed in all sorts of spooks and ghosts. Golding was very aware that his father was lower middle class, and he was aware of it particularly because in Marlborough, at one end of the village street was Marlborough College, one of the great public schools of England. The other end of the street was Marlborough Grammar School, where his father taught and Golding attended. And Golding resented it greatly. He says how he was filled with envy and hatred. He never got over it. It's one of the things his dreams are full of.
December the 13th, 1971. This dream takes place for the most part in the dining room of 29 The Green, Marlborough. Jos is there, but he is not Jos. For one thing, he is about a foot taller than me, and I believe him to be infinitely stronger. He has got hold of a baby, and he is laughing at it, at me, at everything. He also has a knife. He pulls the baby out until its arms are stretched and fixed in the attitude of crucifixion. He begins to work on the hands and fingers, dissecting them into patterns, while the baby wails and cries. I am terrified and revolted. Either I can do nothing, or I am too frightened to do anything. He had a great capacity for seeing wickedness in himself, and of course drawing on that wickedness. I think he used the consciousness of what he might have done to write his books. And perhaps in that way he felt he was keeping this other person in its cage.
In 1930, at the age of 19, Golding went up to Brasenose College, Oxford, where he was the only grammar school boy in his year.
He went along to the University Appointments Committee. You go to that in your last year and they tell you where your career may lie. And the notes of the chap interviewing him say that he is not top drawer, NTD, and not quite a gentleman, and would be all right for a day school, but not a public school. So that was their estimate of him, and he knew that that's how he was regarded by fellow students, not only by the dons.
She came down the stairs and stood, and there was nothing to do but look, nothing needing to be said. She took a scarf, her father's, I think, and we went out together. We went to a blackened-out pub and sat hand in hand, both stunned by this overwhelming sense of recognition. We kissed then and there in public without shame or bravado, because although people stood within a yard of us, we were alone. And we both recognized, without a moment's doubt, that we should never let each other go.
He went to Maidstone for his first teaching job, Maidstone Grammar School. And there he met Anne, his wife. They met at a Left Book Club meeting in London.
He always says, you know, do tell me absolutely what you think about it. And I do. And then I get into fierce trouble for saying something critical. And he goes away and he mutters. And he looks it over, and finally he does most often agree.
The The Goldings were married in 1939, and their son David was born the following year.
I think he was a very good father in things because he didn't do the wrong things. I mean, he didn't bully you, although he did think he had bullied me at a certain time when I was very young, that he's trying to sort of make a man of me or something. When I was a bit young to be made a man of, I thought. I mean, he took me sailing and taught me how to sail and so on. I shared his feeling that sailing was a very important thing.
When he was a student at Oxford, David had a major mental breakdown from which he has never fully recovered.
I think I've always had some sort of biochemical problem. When my mother was carrying me in her womb, she had German measles. That probably affected me. I mean, she did say later that in these days probably I would have had an abortion if that had happened, and I'm glad that she didn't.
So am I.
Thank you. Thank you.
Three months after David was born, Golding joined the Navy and saw active service throughout the war.
I came up out of my cabin at about 0800, when Valkyrin and Westkapelle Light were in sight. The rest of the assault was proceeding in, about a mile on my starboard bow, with the landing craft stretching astern. The first shell made my heart beat quickly, and I tried to stop my teeth chattering, because now I knew it wasn't going to be an easy assault. The radar began to show up assault craft and Westkapelle, and finally I decided to cut loose and run in. Odd shells were dropping here and there. I was feeling unhappy, but fairly fatalistic. I was worried about the obvious balls up that the rockets were making.
In 1944, Golding captained a rocket ship during one of the bloodiest operations of the entire war, the assault on the Dutch island of Walcheren. The island was heavily defended because it controlled access to the major port of Antwerp.
This attack was one of the grimmest of the whole war. Heavy shelling from the enemy met the landing craft, many of which were lost. Our Typhoons dived on the Hun and blasted him with rockets. Our rocket-firing ships poured a murderous fire into the defenders' positions, while our smoke ships laid a covering screen.
When the bombardment began, Golding realized that the other Allied ships had made a mistake, and their rockets were exploding amongst their own troops.
A couple of ships were sunk. Also, the coast wasn't bombarded except by Dad, who continued on in a sort of rather Nelsonic way. Dad managed to drop the rockets just in advance of the Marines. They were the first people ashore. It was rather tragic because Dad had been informed that the Germans had evacuated the civilians, and in fact they hadn't evacuated civilians. So a lot of civilians got killed. That must have haunted Dad, I think.
He never forgot that. He never forgot the people who'd been killed. And he never forgot the fact that he'd actually killed civilians as well. Killed the nice Dutch people who hadn't done any harm to anyone.
At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
You've said that the Second World War changed your attitude towards human beings and towards human nature. Can you tell us how it changed it?
It simply changed because bit by bit we discovered what the Nazis had been doing. Here was this highly civilized race of people who were doing, one gradually found out, impossible things. I remember in those days saying to myself, yes, well, I have a Nazi inside me. Given the right circumstances, I could have been a Nazi. But bit by bit, as I discovered more and more what had gone on, that really changed my view of what people were capable of, and therefore what human nature was. So that political nostrums, if you like, seemed to me just to fall flat on their face in front of this capacity men had for a sort of absolute evil.
What did he say? He says there's a beast. Comes out of the sea.
Jack spoke loudly. This head is for the beast. It's a gift. The silence accepted the gift and awed them. The head remained there, dim-eyed, grinning faintly, blood blackening between the teeth. All at once they were running away as fast as they could through the forest towards the open beach. Simon stayed where he was, a small brown image concealed by the leaves. Even if he shut his eyes, the sow's head still remained like an after-image. The half-shut eyes were dim with the infinite cynicism of adult life. They assured Simon that everything was a bad business.
The whole book is posing a question. You think you've won a war. What you've done is finished a war. There was a crime committed in that war, the like of which perhaps was never committed in human history, and you've got to do something about it.
Ralph looked at him dumbly. For a moment he had a fleeting picture of the strange glamour that had once invested the beaches. But the island was scorched up like dead wood. Simon was dead, and Jack had... The tears had begun to flow, and sobs shook him. He gave himself up to them now for the first time on the island, great shuddering spasms of grief that seemed to wrench his whole body. His voice rose unto the black smoke before the burning wreckage of the island, and infected by that emotion, the other little boys began to shake and sob too. And in the middle of them, with filthy body, matted hair, and unwiped nose, Ralph wept for the end of innocence, the darkness of man's heart, and the fall through the air of the true, wise friend called Piggy. It's really hard to read that without crying. It's an incredible piece of prose, because unwiped nose, it's a child suddenly, and yet he's been a man a moment before. There's no sentimentality, but the true wise friend. It's almost the first time he's realised what a value Piggy was to him. And he doesn't get gushes of emotions, he gets two adjectives, true wise friend. I think it's absolutely crucial to Lord of the Flies that it couldn't have been written by somebody who wasn't a schoolmaster. Because he knew boys, he saw how boys behaved day in and day out.
OK, I want to start with the conch, because that's almost the first thing that gets picked up. So, Tom and Elliot.
Piggy's death and the conches being smashed is the same time. Yeah. This kind of represents...
the end of civilization.
Excellent. Let Tom finish on that one. That's a really good canter there. Excellent. Tom.
It shows, when this happens, it shows it's the complete end of civilization and laws and order, because Piggy, towards the end of the book, was the only one keeping law and order. So when he dies and when the conch is shattered, which throughout the book was representing it, it shows that they've all sort of turned into savage and don't really represent anything anymore.
Because it's interesting the way it changes from being a means of signalling and calling to something completely different when they, in their assemblies, almost like a mace or something ceremonial, doesn't it?
Yeah.
When he came out of the Navy, Golding returned to his job as a teacher at Bishop Wordsworth School. But he wrote whenever he could, even in lessons, and much of Lord of the Flies was written in school time, in a standard issue exercise book.
So this is the manuscript of Lord of the Flies. He used these exercise books for a lot of his early work. He, I think, abstracted them from the school store. He wrote, as you'll see, tiny writing which flows over the ruled lines of the exercise book. And he added in notes, as you'll see, in red biro, schoolmaster's biro, he used to call it, as if he was marking schoolboys' essays.
In 1953, Golding sent his novel to 9 publishers, all of whom rejected it. Undaunted, he offered the manuscript to Faber & Faber, one of the most prestigious London firms, whose directors included the poet T.S. Eliot.
Crawley, I think you didn't like it.
Well, I'm not really opposed to publication. I was just doubtful of its reception by the English-speaking people.
I was a very, very junior editor. I'd only been in Faber's for about a few months, I think, at this time. But already there's one particular sort of thing I could spot, and that was the tired, weather-beaten old manuscript that had been the rind of a lot of publishers before it reached us. And this was very much that. It was a large, yellowing manuscript, and was bound in rather depressing, hairy brown cardboard, and with a short formal covering letter. And Miss Parkinson had written her little note on that already.
This is the comment made by the professional reader that Faber's employed. And she says, "Time, the future. Absurd and uninteresting fantasy about the explosion of an atom bomb on the colonies. A group of children who land in jungle country near New Guinea. Rubbish and dull, pointless." And then she puts an R for reject in a circle.
Charles Monteith decided to take the manuscript home and was captivated by Golding's story. He persuaded Faber & Faber to publish the book on condition that Golding made some significant changes to the text.
This first version is drastically different from the Lord of the Flies that most people have read. This is a religious novel. He says that he underwent a religious convulsion, and he came out of the war deeply religious. When Charles Monteith of Faber's rescued this novel from the slush pile, he thought all this must go. All the supernatural stuff must go. And Golding concedes, until what came out is a novel that is secular. It's not assuming any supernatural intervention.
There was Golding, that was me, so we were at either end of the... I was the school organist. So, you know, I used to play every day, and he used to come every day. He was a very loyal member of the choir. I used to go and practice the organ up at St. Martin's, just up the road. I used to go up to that church, and I would suddenly find that Golding was there, on his knees, praying, alone. And that wasn't just one occasion, many occasions. That made a great impression on me. I recognised that there was a man for whom religion was really important.
When I was growing up, he was definitely Christian. We went to church. He took me to the cathedral, told me not to swing my legs and behave properly. But there was also the sense that they were places of mystery. And not always completely safe places. I think he gave me the idea that a church was full of dark thoughts as well as spiritual thoughts.
Golding's Christianity is a very odd thing. I mean, he was never an Orthodox Christian, that's for sure. There were various bits of Christianity he hated. A friend said to him once, "Have you ever taken the sacrament?" He said, "I would be sick." He said that the crucifixion should never be depicted. It's a horror to be veiled, he said.
Although Lord of the Flies received good reviews, and Golding was recognised as a striking new talent, he couldn't afford to give up teaching and had to continue with an exhausting daily routine.
He came in with proofs, typewritten pages, and he'd hand them out to you. And he said, I don't want you to read these, I just want you to count the words. And then you had to put in pencil how many words were on the page and hand them over to somebody else. And then you got another one so you could check. And it was certainly The Inheritors, the one that I was looking at, because it was all about cavemen.
He looked at the water, then at each of the people in turn, and they waited. I have a picture. He freed a hand and put it flat on his head as if confining the images that flickered there. Mal is not old, but clinging to his mother's back. There is more water, not only here but along the trail where we came. A man is wise. He makes me take a tree that has fallen and... His eyes, deep in their hollows, turn to the people, imploring them to share a picture with him. At last, Ha spoke. I do not see this picture.
I read the first page, and I remember saying to myself, oh my God, first it was schoolboys, now it's bloody cavemen. Of course, The Inheritors, I think, is the best book he ever wrote, and he thought so too.
Together with his love of classical literature, Golding had a deep interest in archaeology and often visited the digs that were taking place in his part of Wiltshire, which is littered with prehistoric sites. His second novel, The Inheritors, focuses on a small band of Neanderthals who encounter an unknown new species, Homo sapiens, and are gradually exterminated.
He tries to enter the mind, if you can use that word, of a pre-mind creature. And he didn't follow what most people thought about Neanderthals at that time at all. Most people thought Neanderthals hadn't got language, and most people still think that. He thought they have a kind of language. He gave his Neanderthals the ability to see pictures in each other's minds and in their own minds. I cannot see that picture, they say to each other, if they don't understand. These Neanderthals are wonderfully sensitive to the external world. They sort of think in metaphors, if they think at all. And he's got to put that into language, which of course is impossible really. So he invents, he makes a new language, goes inside a mode of apprehension of the world which is quite unlike anything we have.
They were as different from the group of bold hunters and magicians who had sailed up the river towards the fall, as a soaked feather is from a dry one. Restlessly, he turned the ivory in his hands. What was the use of sharpening it against a man? Who would sharpen a point against the darkness of the world? The questions he was puzzled by, I think, were questions to do with the fragility of goodness. Why is it fragile? Why does it suddenly break down? He worked out these questions in the form of modern myths. In other words, stories full of images which contain a great deal of meaning which is latent rather than expressed in any simple propositions or arguments. They're like the myths of religion, but different from them. So, for example, the myth that is embodied in The Inheritors, set in the context not of a biblical story or a religious story, but in the context of an evolutionary biological understanding of the prehistory of the human animal. I think the tragic aspect of Golding's myth is that the Neanderthals, in some sense, intuited their fate and knew that it couldn't be avoided.
I think it is a very sympathetic account of how it would have felt to be a Neanderthal at this particular point, that is, as we now know, almost at the end of their existence. possibly the last group which died out in the face of these incoming alien modern humans. So that's what makes it so poignant.
In the 1950s, Golding bought a series of sailing boats in which the family would spend their holidays, sailing along the south coast and across the Channel to France.
Well, the first boat was Seahorse, which was a lifeboat. And the first year, we sailed off in that. After he'd converted her, put a deck and a cabin on, we felt that was a luxury.
It wasn't even like camping, you know, it was just much worse because you couldn't get out and walk. It was the most extraordinary adventure to take up.
Another shipping forecast issued by the Met Office at 2343 on Saturday the 18th. Rockall, westerly, veering northwesterly, 7 to severe gale 9, decreasing 5. Showers.
He eyed the peculiar shapes that lay across the trousers indifferently for a while, until at last it occurred to him how strange it was that lobsters should sit there. Then he was suddenly seized with a terrible loathing for lobsters and flung them away so that they cracked on the rock. The dull pain of the blow extended him into them again, and they became his hands, lying discarded where he had tossed them.
Pincher Martin is one of Golding's strangest books because, of course, except through memory, it only has one protagonist who's even more radically isolated than the schoolboys on the island.
Pincher Martin, Golding's experimental third novel, is about a sailor who is stranded on a rock in the Atlantic after his ship has been sunk by an enemy submarine. The self-absorbed central character appears to look back over his previous life, and the book is both a moral investigation and an hallucinogenic account of physical isolation.
Golding is struggling with how human beings represent their lives to themselves and how it's very difficult to tell the difference between a dream of a life and the actual life that has been lived. Is it actually a work of the imagination? And that there's actually nothing else but, if there are meanings in human life, it's simply a successful exercise in the imagination.
In Pincher Martin, the rock is more than a rock in the sea or a struggle for a man's survival on this rock. It has other implications.
Pincher Martin isn't about a man who tries to survive by climbing on a rock. It is, in fact, about a man who dies on page 2. I made him die very deliberately on page 2. And the rest of the book, right up to the last chapter, is, in fact, about the man in purgatory. Because he is a very wicked man who has no kind of religious experience at all, he can't see the compassion of God, and all the time he's hanging on, he's grieved, sheer wickedness, until finally he's nothing but claws clutched into each other. And that is still there, resisting this black lightning, which is the compassion of God, trying to open them up and really trying to take them away, trying to take all the Pincher structure away.
Here are some recurrent nightmares. On 27th of January, his second dream is, I am going to be hanged. And then his third dream, again, I am going to be hanged. Dream number 2, I'm going to be hanged. In the event, I helped myself to die by slumping to my knees and experience an immediate and satisfactory state of nothingness. Dream ego, that's his word for him in a dream. Dream Ego has his recurrent nightmare. He is to be hanged, and as usual, is under no sort of restraint whatsoever. There is one particular dream where his father is going to be the executioner, and there's another dream where his father has come across the world to see him hanged. Comment: my recurrent dream may be the result of drinking too much. Guilt, in a word. Well, he would get drunk, and he wouldn't get jollily drunk. He'd get rather sort of morosely drunk. After a while, he would drink it as if he disliked it, as if it was evil-tasting medicine. And I even caught him once pouring bottles of wine down the sink in an attempt to get rid of this sort of loathsome substance. I mean, he had enormous resources of self-loathing anyway. Sometimes it would just go over the edge, and it would be horrible.
In a flash of vision, he saw how other feet would cut their track arrow straight towards the city, understood how the tower was laying a hand on the whole landscape, altering it, dominating it, enforcing a pattern that reached wherever the tower could be seen by sheer force of its being there. He swung round the horizon and saw how true his vision was. There were new tracks, people in parties making their way sturdily between bushes and through heather. The countryside was shrugging itself obediently into a new shape. Presently, with its great finger sticking up, the city would lie like the hub at the center of a predestined wheel. New street, new inn, new wharf, new bridge, and now new roads to bring in new people.
The Spire, Golding's fifth novel, is about a medieval dean called Jocelyn who has a vision which compels him to build a huge steeple on top of his cathedral. The physical impossibility of the project doesn't deter him, and he sacrifices everything to achieve his dream.
The Spire is a novel about the building of Salisbury Cathedral spire. And that was a thing he looked at every day from his classroom window.
When I was teaching and had it in the window over those bowed heads, I was always puzzled by it. It's obviously possible because there it is, but given what technical means were possible at the time, that's in the 13th century, it seemed to be nearly impossible anyway, and I wanted to find out what kind of people would do it.
When you turned your mind to finding out, you didn't read old records or look up the actual people who'd done it. You went about your own way.
You can't find it out because there's no manuals on how to build a Gothic cathedral. I said to myself, what would these people have? And the answer is, of course, they'd have blocks and tackles. Well, I knew about seamanship. So I said to myself, how would sailors set about putting this thing up? And I got at it from that point of view. So as far as I know, the whole thing is an invention from beginning to end, but it seems to work and people believe it.
The whole building revealed itself to me. The whole building spoke. "We are labour," said the walls. The ogival windows clasped their hands and sang, "We are prayer." And the trinity of the triangular roof, but how shall I say it? I had tried to give away my house, and it had returned to me 1,000-fold.
He presents in the Spire this character called Dean Jocelyn, who builds the Spire. He's responsible for planning it, getting the money. And what is Jocelyn motivated by is the great question of the novel. Is he motivated by egotism? Yes. A kind of sublimated sexuality? Yes. Or worship? Yes, as well. So he's questioning through Jocelyn himself, I think, and I think that's when it comes at this quite crucial time in his life when he is just about to start being a full-time writer.
I wanted to conceive the kind of man who would say this must be done and would not know at the beginning that even if God had told him to do this, nevertheless the cost was going to be his life and probably other people's lives too. I still think it's a good image almost of any human endeavor, that it can never be wholly good. It must always have a cost in people. Jocelyn was a fanatic, was he not? We are in the presence of religious fanaticism. We see what it can do. Its cost in suffering and death and sorrow is immeasurable.
I thought it would be simple. I thought the spire would complete a stone Bible or be the apocalypse in stone. I never guessed in my folly that there would be a new lesson at every level and a new power, nor could I have been told. I had to build in faith against advice. That's the only way. But when you build like this, men blunt like a poor chisel or fly off like the head of an axe. I was too taken up with my vision to consider this, and the vision was enough.
He just has captured what happens when a vision gets so mixed up with self-aggrandizement, when somebody so lacks self-awareness that actually they and their project become one. And so what we have is a perfect description, not just of Dean's, but of any human venture where a leader loses track of their own humility. We should distrust the voice that tells us that we are right and everybody else is wrong.
I have always been a great admirer of Golding's talent, but this is a very, very, very bad book.
I happen to agree, only more. I heard the word Gothic mentioned a couple of times, but this is all mock Gothic.
The Spire came out, I think, in April, and quite soon afterwards there was a radio review of it. And one of the people on the panel had really taken against the book.
The writer sometimes seems to be using the Dark Ages as an excuse for extravagance.
I was much more revolted by the book's successes. I believe an American reviewer has already said of this book that it touches the wuthering depths. Those were my sentences.
We were all sitting around in the sitting room in our cottage in Wiltshire, and my father, I'd never seen him so emotional. He turned absolutely white and rushed out of the room.
I think it is a bad book because I find its symbolism crude. I find the sexual undertone of spire building very, very badly managed, very pervasive, very disagreeable.
And my mother started swearing, and I've never heard her swear like that. But I think it frightened my father. I think it had an effect on his ability to be confident in his imagination, and perhaps even to be confident in my mother's judgment. So this shook him. This really shook him.
He opened his eyes quickly, and there was the head, grinning amusedly in the strange daylight, ignoring the flies, the spilled guts, even ignoring the indignity of being spiked on a stick. He looked away, licking his dry lips. A gift for the beast. Might not the beast come for it? The head, he thought, appeared to agree with him. Run away, said the head silently. Go back to the others.
Although Lord of the Flies had been a critical success, it wasn't until the publication of the American edition, and particularly the paperback in 1959, that Golding became an international bestseller and started to earn large amounts in royalties. Lord of the Flies has since sold more than 40 million copies.
Well, I grew up in a little town called Durham, Maine, and at that time, the state of Maine had a bookmobile service. It was a mobile library. And one day, I said to the lady who drove the bookmobile, do you have anything about kids the way that kids really are? And she thought a little bit about it, and she said, well, there's one book, and it's called Lord of the Flies, but if anyone asks you where you got it, say you found it on your own, because I might lose my job. That's an adult book. And I thought, an adult book about kids. And I was completely riveted by the story from the very beginning, because it was like a boy's story, the ones that I was accustomed to. The difference was the boys were real boys. They acted the way that I understood boys acted.
You guys are assholes.
At last the words of the chant floated up to them across the bowl of blackened wood and ashes. Kill the pig, cut her throat, spill her blood.
You have to put things in context, too, of the time when I read those lines. It would have been 1960, around the time that Kennedy became president, and the civil rights unrest was beginning in the South, and we saw on the nightly news police turning dogs on people who just wanted to ride the bus.
The Vietnam War made the book seem even more relevant. It acquired a cult status amongst young people in America, and Golding became a 60s phenomenon.
We knew that there was bad stuff there, and I think that past a certain age, most kids do, and you look for somebody to explain it to you. And that's one of the things that the Golding book did, was it explained it to me. It didn't preach. I didn't need that, but stories that illuminated, that was valuable, and I grabbed that with both hands. So in that sense, it was comforting. It was the idea that somebody else understands.
Are you going to Scarborough Fair? Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. Remember me to one who lives there. She once was a true love of mine.
For 30 years, the Goldings lived in Bowerchalk, an idyllic Wiltshire village just outside Salisbury.
I'm small and in the garden at Marlborough. It is twilight. There is a live snake in the garden, which seems to me about 5 feet long and thick as my arm. I hold it firmly close behind the head with my left hand, since I am left-handed. The snake writhes and struggles, but I know it cannot bite or sting me so long as I hold it just so. Somehow the affair changes. I'm examining a dark hole in the garden, and the snake is inside, its head now resting in the entrance. I mean, you know, he doesn't bother to say, this is just so amazingly Freudian, I don't know what to do about it. I think it was 1966. My father received a letter from an American graduate student, a woman, saying she was studying his work and would like to talk to him. And he got lots of these letters, and mostly he said no. This time he said no politely, and she was much more persistent.
I wrote him a letter. I got a response, and he told me, yes, that he would see me. I could take the train up to Salisbury, and he would give me lunch in a pub, and he would be sitting in his Rover, and he wrote out the license number. And we went to a pub for lunch, and then we talked. I think the two of us were both very, very nervous. I certainly was. And then he took me to Old Sarum, and he took me to Stonehenge.
This was a very big thing in both my parents' lives. And Virginia was a very attractive, very intelligent, very sympathetic person, very interested in his writing. Somebody I think my father wanted to be friends with. But I think it would be misleading if I didn't acknowledge that he also, at some degree, I think he fell in love with her.
Was he infatuated with a young Virginia Tiger? Was he smitten with a young Virginia Tiger, to use an English phrase? Was he besotted with a young Virginia Tiger, to use probably something that might be used in France or Italy, in one of those wicked places? I would say yes, he must have been. There must have been that interest. We were not lovers, although it was thought that we were. I'm sure that Anne thought that might have been a possibility. We were not lovers. We were very, very good friends.
We had one of those interminable, reasonable conversations about the relationship between men and women. One would not be jealous. One would understand enjoyment taken with a third person. Nothing was permanent. Nothing was more than relative. Sex was a private business. Sex was a clinical matter, and contraception had removed the need for orthodox family life. And then suddenly we were clinging to each other as though we were the only stable thing in an earthquake.
We have to remember that I was young, certainly smart, and attractive. So she made it very uncomfortable for me. I think she didn't like me. I'm sure she didn't like me.
Anne was deeply, deeply resentful and jealous. Because she thought that she was the person who shared his creative life, of course, and had shared his creative life, still did. So, yeah, it was a very bad moment for the marriage and, in some sense, didn't heal.
Golding's preferred means of escape was to go to sea. In 1966, he used some of his newfound wealth to buy a glamorous Dutch racing yacht called Tenace, in which he planned to sail through the canals of France to Greece.
It was 1967, and we set sail on this tremendous boat. We were sailing through lightish fog, when suddenly part of the fog, I mean, it was most extraordinary, the part of the fog seemed to get thicker. And then we realized it was the bow of a huge ship. It was an enormous freighter, and it wasn't very far away, and it was coming straight for us. And my father had put the boat about, and we just glanced down the side of this boat, and water started to come in. And I think it very likely that we would have drowned. Then we saw that somebody on the boat had seen us. They went round in a huge circle and came back and found us again. It affected both my parents terribly strongly. My mother instantly became very ill. My father became fantastically depressed. And I think it's easy to see why. He was a sailor. That was one of the defining aspects of him, I think. And if you're a sailor and a captain and you lose your ship, that's a very crushing disgrace.
I was able to see him after that. We were in a pub in London, and he looked up at a lovely barmaid and remembered lines from Eliot's The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. And these are, "We have lingered in the chambers of the sea by sea girls, wreathed with seaweed, red and brown, till human voices wake us and we drown." I would think that we were in correspondence, though less and less in over 5 years. I think that Anne felt it had gone on to the correspondence had gone on too long, and that that should stop.
I find it difficult to decide when the crisis began, but by 1971 it was unendurable. Not only did life seem pointless, there was a kind of raw intensity about daylight perception that could not be endured. On top of that, there was an insomniac length to every night, when each second had its own weight, its tiny addition, like a Chinese water torture. The remedy for this, of course, was drink, the old anodyne. I do not now remember how many times I was dead drunk in this period. I think part of the depression, really, was simply that he didn't have enough structure around him. He'd had this terrifying school day, and he wrote books in it very successfully. I mean, I think he missed that, and he missed the contact, certainly. And it's a bit of a mistake a lot of the time for writers to shut themselves away.
After The Tenace was sunk in 1967, Golding wouldn't write another novel for more than 10 years.
He had quit the job as a teacher. He was living and working at home. Anne was also not working outside the home. There were occasional moments when the two of them would disappear and it was known they were talking about Bill's writing. But also in the early 70s, this was a period when he was having a lot of trouble writing. So in a sense, the absolutely verboten question was, are you writing something now? You know, would you like to talk about it?
Once or twice I was drunk for more than a day. I said unforgivable things to Anne and pulled her about on at least 3 occasions. The rawness of daylight pushed at me. The presence of David exasperated me. My inability to write fretted me, and I drank.
Another source of Golding's distress was his son David's mental illness. Although David went to Oxford, he found university very stressful, and his behaviour became increasingly unstable.
My tutor at Brasenose offered to let me have a year off and go to the Warneford Hospital in Oxford. But I rejected that. I didn't. I felt I had to face this and go through the normal process of an undergraduate. But later, it got worse. I think it really hit about 1968, because that's a year I really don't remember much about. I mean, I know that things were happening which I should have been interested in, like the invasion of Czechoslovakia by the Soviet Union.
For my parents to have a child with a real severe, lifelong mental illness was, I think, their great tragedy.
The figure was a child, drawing nearer. He was naked, and the miles of light lit him variously. A child's stride is quick, but this child walked down the very middle of the street with a kind of ritual gait that in an adult would have been called solemn. His face was so swollen he could only glimpse where he was going through the merest of slits. It was perhaps something animal that was directing him away from the place where the world was being consumed. Perhaps it was luck, good or bad, that kept him pacing in the one direction where he might survive.
I think that Darkness Visible is Golding's reaction to what had happened to David. He said that there were two novels he had tried to portray a saint in. One was Simon in Lord of the Flies. The other was Mattie in Darkness Visible. He was writing a novel about the Blitz and a child who walks naked out of a firestorm. It can't have happened. This is the kind of firestorm that melts metal. Eventually, after very strange adventures, the kind that happened to a sort of religious maniac, he develops a relationship with spirits who tell him that he's to be sacrificed. I think that Darkness Visible is a kind of homage to David. David was very religious, became a Catholic, gave away his possessions, saintly boy. And I think this novel is an attempt to come to terms with and see what is great in David.
Sometime this year, my brother said to me, of course, you know, I think Mattie is me, really. And I was surprised, but in a sense relieved, because that means it's okay to discuss it now. I think there's a huge link between Mattie and David, and I think there's also a link between Mattie and my father. My own feeling, having watched David through these terrible vicissitudes, is that his mind is quite similar to my father's, and his imaginative capacity is quite similar. But something has just tipped it too far that way. Whereas I think my father's imagination, which is often quite touch and go on the, you know, is he sane, is he mad front, it just manages to walk the line in between it.
We're now alerted to the dangers of an uncontrolled use of pesticides. Traces of DDT have even been found in the fat of penguins. And it took Professor Lovelock's electron absorption detector to spot the minute, although important quantities involved.
We both of us walked from our homes to the village post office. And we would start talking to each other in the way you do, certainly in a village like Barchalk. And that led to exchange of all sorts of views. We talked about it, and in a sense, it was a joint thing. The Earth is a system made up of all of the rocks, the ocean and the atmosphere, and all of the living things working together to form a self-regulating entity that keeps its climate and chemical composition always so that the planet is habitable. In other words, big as it is, it's still behaving as if it were something alive. And Bill said, well, if you're going to come up with a grand idea like that, you better give it a good name. So I said, well, what would you suggest? He said, I'd call it Gaia, the Greek name for the Earth's goddess. Now we, if not in the spirit, have been caught up to see our Earth, our mother, Gaia Mater, set like a jewel in space. We have no excuse now for supposing her riches inexhaustible, nor the area we have to live on limitless, because unbounded. We are the children of that great blue-white jewel. Through our mother, we are part of the solar system, and part through that of the whole universe. In the blazing poetry of the fact, we are the children of the stars.
In October 1983, Golding was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature, the first English writer to receive it since Winston Churchill in 1953. One of the judges in Stockholm announced that he disagreed with the choice and described Golding as a small British phenomenon of no importance.
There was a tremendous farce. Other judges who shouldn't have broken confidence wrote to Golding to cheer him up and said that these decisions were never actually unanimous, that this bloke had taken leave of his senses. Nonetheless, Golding was deeply hurt. He was deeply hurt. It just, in a way, reinforced his feeling that somewhere in the establishment of culture and the arts, there was enmity directed against him.
These are the good fellows whose duty it is to steer our ship, to haul on the ropes and do strange things with our sails in positions which must surely be perilous, so high they go. All this I watch with complacency from far off in the shelter of the wooden wall with its stairways that lead up to where the privileged passengers live. But forward, beyond the white line which separates the social orders, the people work and sing, and keep time to the fiddle when they play. For like children, they play, dancing innocently to the sound of the fiddle.
Rites of Passage is the first in a trilogy of novels which chronicle a voyage from England to Australia in the early 19th century. It is a monumental late work in which Golding pursues his constant themes of class, myth, the border between reality and unreality, and man's capacity for inhumanity.
It's a voyage that takes a year from Tilbury Docks to Sydney Harbour. The overall headline of the story is trying to get from one end of the earth to the other by sea, using ropes and pulleys, canvas and wood in order to try and battle against the ever-changing, ever-unpredictable and unmasterable sea.
Celebrations are in full swing with the news that the 1980 Booker Prize for Fiction has been won by William Golding. Rites of Passage, a powerful allegorical novel about life on board a sailing ship going from England to Australia in the early 19th century.
I don't like the word allegorical, I don't like the word symbolic. The word I really like is mythic, and people always think that means full of lies, whereas of course what it really means is full of a truth that cannot be told in any other way but a story.
What do you think, to put it very crudely, you were trying to say? What is that truth that you were trying to convey?
Oh, mercy, the brotherhood of man, and the capacity for cruelty that we all have in us, and which we have to control.
No, I'm not ready. No! No! Please!
Rites of Passage centres on the public humiliation of one of the passengers, a parson who gets drunk, has sex with one of the sailors, and then literally dies of shame.
A low and filthy fellow who must be cleansed!
At one point, there's a crossing of the line ceremony where they go across the equator and Neptune arises, and there's this big sort of festival, and the Reverend Colley is the subject of the dunking, the sort of ritual to take one of the passengers and sort of baptize them. And it's very, very fierce. I think Golding's always been fascinated with that, how closely we rub up against barbarity. And that within the blink of an eye, you can have something very civilized and seemingly in control turn into something that is monstrous.
I think he was particularly interested in humiliation. The character Colley is desperately and utterly and completely humiliated. So there's drunkenness, there's sexual humiliation. It's all in public. I think that somewhat goes back to the social class aspect of things.
In June 1988, Golding was given a knighthood. Paradoxically, for a writer who had long complained about the English class system, He had lobbied vociferously for the honour and immediately had his and Anne's passports changed to Sir William and Lady Golding. In their 70s, the Goldings had moved to Cornwall. They bought Tullimar, a large Georgian house a few miles from the sea in the village of Perrina-Worthall, about as far away from the literary world Golding so disliked as it was possible to be.
Matthew Evans, who was then the chairman of Faber and Faber, said Bill rather wants a version of Lord of the Flies done for the stage. And down I went to Cornwall, and they said he'll meet you at the station. He said, we live down here because people can't get at us. But he said, I think that the way to present this book in the theatre, and I think it would be good in the theatre, is to try and scrape it back to the original intellectual themes that are at its heart. It really is the story of English democracy and the way in which democracy is a very fragile thing that can be broken.
The dark boy, Roger, stirred at last and spoke up. Let's have a vote. Yes, vote for a chief. Let's vote.
This symbol of the conch, which is at the heart of the whole book, which is the moment at which they can all come together and agree on something, it could be a symbol of kingly power, it could be the staff at the English Houses of Parliament, but it's very much to do with English consensus. And he was fascinated by that, and that's what he saw the book being about, because it's about a group of English schoolboys. As the guy says at the end of the book, I thought an English bunch of schoolboys would have done a little bit better than that. So it's sort of about the old school tie, too.
Maybe there is a booth. Get him! He's got the conch. What if I mean is, maybe it's only us.
On the island, there was nothing for the boys to fear but fear itself, really. But that fear produced gangs and produced violence in the end. You've got Jack's camp and then you've got Ralph's camp at the end of the day. The only thing that produced those was the fear and the beast, which was the fear.
Could you give us an example there?
I don't know, say, like recently, the riots. As people say, they're destroying their own place, their own cities. Because on the island, they're afraid of things when really it turns out to be themselves. So when they destroy their own habitat through the fires and destroy each other's lives.
Jack had backed right against the tribe, and there were a solid mass of menace that bristled with spears. The intention of a charge was forming among them. Ralph stood facing them, a little to one side, his spear ready. The storm of sound beat at them, an incantation of hatred.
The debate about good and evil is absolutely at the heart. The debate about original sin. Is man a wicked person who has to be improved and moulded by society, or is man naturally good? It touches on an absolutely fundamental debate.
We have a disharmony in our natures. We cannot live together without injuring each other.
If you look at not just Lord of the Flies, but all the books, I don't think there is another post-war English novelist who goes so deeply into these fundamental questions of morality and politics. I can't think of another writer who matches him for the intense way he experiences human emotion, human passion, in a poetic and yet controlled and English way.
I found his body that morning. He died very, very suddenly. And fortunately, my father, who's a doctor, was in the house and could talk me through this, and indeed the rest of the family, because I'd never seen a dead body before. I wanted to put the body on the back of a horse and take it to the top of a hill and make a bonfire out of it. Or alternatively, put it on a boat, a flaming boat, and push it out to sea. He was clearly very involved with the great epic writers. So I pictured him also as a kind of Greek bard in a kind of Homeric mode, you know, almost with a lyre, kind of declaiming these things.
In the spire, when Jocelyn's dying, he's obviously in a fairly weird state, and he sees the people around him not as the human beings he's familiar with, but as shapes and structures and textures that are completely unfamiliar. And this was 1964, nearly 30 years before he died, and he obviously had a strong idea of what it was like to die. No matter how high he rises, robe after robe, tomorrow or the day after, they will tap 3 times on the smooth parchment of that forehead with the silver hammer. Then his mind trotted away again, and he saw what an extraordinary creature Father Adam was, covered in parchment from head to foot, parchment stretched or tucked in, with curious hairs on top, and a mad structure of bones to keep it apart. Immediately, as in a dream that came between him and the face, he saw all people naked, creatures of light brown parchment, which bound in their pipes or struts. He saw them pace or prance in sheets of woven stuff, with the skins of dead animals under their feet. And he began to struggle and gasp, to leave this vision behind him in words that never reached the air.
It seems to me that we do live in 2 worlds. There is this physical one, which is coherent, and there is a spiritual one, which, to the average man, with his flashes of religious experience, if you like to call them, that world is very often incoherent. This experience of having 2 worlds to live in all the time, or not all the time, occasionally, is a vital one and is what living is like.